It is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker. Vermont resident Bill McKibben co-founded 350.org, the world's largest grassroots climate campaign with 7 Middlebury College students. He's authored more than a dozen books, including The End of Nature in 1989, and this was the first book written for a general audience about climate change. His writing also frequently appears in world-renowned publications, including The New Yorker, National Geographic, and Rolling Stone. And it doesn't stop there. Bill has received 18 honorary degrees, the Right Livelihood Award, the Gandhi Peace Award, and the Thomas Merton Award. His work has a singular focus. Global climate change is a threat of extreme urgency, and an immediate practical response to this is required. With the Arctic melting, the Midwest in drought, and storms like Hurricane Sandy scouring the Atlantic, Bill has emphasized that action at both local and industry-wide level is needed if solutions are to be found. With this, and without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Bill, and I ask you to join me in thanking Bill for being with us today.
Liz, thank you very much. I actually should not come to this conference ever because, 14 years ago, I think, our new house in Ripton got one of these prizes for being highly efficient. Our neighbor, Jeremy Grip, had helped build it, and it's a wonderful house, and we completely love it. But earlier this summer, I was out doing a piece for the New Yorker, and I spent a few days in Rutland looking at some of the houses that Green Mountain Power and others were working on refurbishing. And by the time I was done, it was very clear to me that our fancy house in Ripton, state of the art 15 years ago, is now a museum piece. And that everybody else has learned how to do all coming of this, the Harry Potter magic out, air source heat pumps, just creating heat out of nowhere, and, on and on and on. I felt like the guy, there with my bottle of Sam Adams, while everybody else was like, well, I've got Hetty Topper, I've got, Hill Farmstead, look at my Lawson's Double Sunshine, So I'm going to just, the second I'm done, I'm going to walk out without even looking at any of the exhibits, so I don't have any more, because it's not like a car where every 10 years you get to just, get another one or something. I mean, I'm just got to stay content with what I have for a while. But what a pleasure just to get to say thank you for continuing to innovate and at such an amazing and powerful rate. And I think more importantly, the thing that really struck me in Rutland, and this picks up, Liz, a little bit on what you were saying, for now being able to spread that innovation into every edge of our housing and building market. What was so moving was to be in what was essentially pretty crappy homes in Rutland that had, in the space of a few days, been transformed into remarkable technological operations, and that in the process were saving people who really needed to save money a lot of money. It is a pleasure to get to think about the time in the not too distant future when the poorest people in Vermont and New England won't be sort of heating the outdoors all winter. We'll be able to keep that money close to home. In an ever more unequal world, it's one of the few things that's trending in the right direction, and y'all are to be thanked for it immensely. The other reason that I shouldn't come here is that basically I'm just a downer, My job in life is just pretty much to bum people out, and So I'll do it for a minute. I'll faithfully bring you up to date on where we are with climate change, and then I'll try somehow to find a little more hopeful note onto which to go. Because it must be said that despite all our efforts, we're not really winning at this point. 2015 was the hottest year we've ever recorded on this planet, and not by a little, by a lot. It crushed the old record set in 2014, crushed it by 1/10 of a degree Celsius. So if you think about the size of the system with which we're dealing and the inertia in that system, the fact that we were able in the course of 12 calendar months to raise its temperature 1/10 of a degree is a pretty sobering operation. This morning came news that January, according to the satellite data, just set the record for the warmest January that we've ever had on this planet. You can see it everywhere. You can see it at a macro level. If you back up and look at the world from outer space, it looks profoundly different than it did 15 or 30 years ago. The Arctic, most of the summer sea ice in the Arctic is now gone. Literally, the planet looks different. I mean, much different. It has a lot less white up top than it did 40 years ago. It's sort of the opposite of what's happened to me over the last 40 years. If you look at the world through a different set of lenses, the ocean, and of course we are an ocean planet, is about 30% more acidic than it was 40 years ago. Think of the changes think of the volume of carbon it took to produce changes in the basic chemistry of the planet's oceans. You can see it at kind of regional levels as we begin to fundamentally disrupt the planet's hydrology, the way that water moves around the planet. We're now beginning to enter into this truly horrible cycle of drought and flood in place after place after place. So, last week in Tasmania, the oldest trees on Earth were on fire as this vast World Heritage area in Tasmania caught fire after the longest, deepest drought in history. Or in South Africa, where friends just sent word today that the corn crop will be reduced at least 25% this year because the drought is the deepest that they've ever measured. And while that's going on, we have place after place with the deepest rains, the fiercest floods. In December this year, the Mississippi was setting new records for places, for flood stage along parts of the Mississippi. In December, that's not when the Mississippi's supposed to be flooding. It's not when it's ever flooded before, but there was so much rain. Shouldn't surprise us too much. In Burlington, on Christmas Eve, the temperature was 68 degrees. It crushed the old temperature record by, 17 degrees. We see the results in people's lives now, day after day after day. All around the world now, people are already on the move because the places where they've lived since time immemorial no longer support them. When you look at those pictures out of the Middle East and out of the refugees streaming into Europe, an important thing to remember is that the academics, and there have been a whole series of papers, now trace much of the instability in Syria to the deepest drought in the history of the Fertile Crescent during the first decade of this millennia. About 1 million people had to move off the farm and into the city because there was no way to grow anything anymore, and that already fragile government could not deal with that influx of people. There was a headline in Time magazine last fall as those refugees were dying in boats trying to get to Greece, and it said, "Are these climate refugees?" They're the harbinger of what we're going to see around the world as people's low-lying islands get overcome by waves, as agriculture becomes impossible in place after place. 2 weeks ago comes news from South America of a not really brand new, but brand new to our hemisphere disease this Zika virus that we're going to hear a lot about. It's transmitted by Aedes aegypti, a mosquito that dearly loves the warmer, wetter world that we're building for it. And it's a particularly, it's just a particularly kind of sad and impossible. If you're bit by it while you're early in your pregnancy, it now appears your child is likely to develop what's called microcephaly, a shrunken head. There were thousands of children born like that in the last few months as the first wave of this disease begins to break. So far, the health ministers in Brazil and Colombia and Venezuela and Jamaica and El Salvador have asked their residents to avoid becoming pregnant for the time being. Okay? Think about that, about the kind of science fiction world almost that is when we're now beginning to grapple with the most basic questions like that. That's what's going on with a world where we have raised the temperature 1 degree Celsius, 1.7 or 8 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? So that's the science of where we are now. The politics is, in certain ways, equally difficult. We just came back from this big conference in Paris in December where the world's nations finally reached some kind of, for the first time, agreement on some steps going forward. And parts of it were encouraging. Really, the part that was encouraging was the kind of rhetorical commitments that people made. The nations of the world all signed off on a document saying we can't let the temperature of the world go up more than 1.5 degrees Celsius or at worst 2 degrees Celsius. These are the lines that must be drawn, okay? Remember, we've already raised temperature 1 degree. So that was good, and that was because there's a big movement now around the world, about which I'll speak a little bit more later, pushing. But if that was the rhetorical goal they said, the pledges that they collected from all the nations of the world, voluntary pledges, no enforcement, no anything, when you add those all up and run them through the computer model, as people out of Heartland, Vermont, were some of the first to do, it turns out that the temperature of the planet is going to go up 3.5 degrees even if people keep those pledges. Okay, so the target's 1.5 degrees Celsius, just under 2 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 degrees Fahrenheit. But the actual plan, if you follow it out, is for a world that's 3.5 degrees Celsius warmer, about 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit, a world that we can't have civilizations like the ones we're used to having on, an impossible world, okay? And so it is that huge gap that we now have to work around and that I want to talk about. And the question is, why do we have such an enormous gap? Why have we done so little so far? Why are we making what still amounts to such slow progress going forward? It's not because we weren't given good warning. You know, the world scientists 25 years ago told us quite explicitly what was going to happen and when it was going to happen and what it was going to look like, okay? And they've been right on every point. If anything, they underestimated how quickly this was going to happen. And it's not, as you all know better than most, because there's nothing we can do about it. There's plenty we can do about it. And there are a few places that have demonstrated even more powerfully than Vermont what we can do if we really set our minds to things. You know, maybe it's Germany that's the one big country on earth that's really, Germany, which perhaps caused more than its share of problems in the 20th century, has provided more than its share of solutions in this one. It's remarkable to go there and and see what's happening, to see that there are now days in the summer when 75 or 80% of the electricity is coming out of solar panels, that there are days in the winter when similar percentages are coming out of wind turbines, to realize that until just a couple of years ago, there were still more solar panels in Bavaria than in all the United States, okay? This is not because Germans have some secret insight into the technology, though they've done very good engineering work. It's because they had the political will to make things happen. They're not the only ones. There are a few other places around the world that are demonstrating the same thing. The Costa Ricans have supplied, through the first 6 months of last year, 100% of their energy from renewable sources. The Danes just announced that last year they'd managed to produce 43% of their electricity from wind, either because Denmark has figured out some way to hog all of the planet's wind, or because they've actually gotten down to work and done what needed doing, you know. No, the reason that we're not getting where we need to get so far is not because we don't know what we need to be doing, and it's not because we don't know how to do it. The scientists and the engineers, and you all have in many ways done your job. The reason that we're not getting where we need to go is because there's another side to this fight, and it's extraordinarily powerful and strong. And that other side is the fossil fuel industry, which is the richest industry the world has ever seen. And they've used that wealth and that power to prevent things from happening time and time and time again. You can see it at the macro level again. We learned maybe the darkest story of the whole global warming era this fall, when teams of reporters, first from the Pulitzer Prize-winning website Inside Climate News, and then from the Los Angeles Times and the Columbia School of Journalism, unveiled a series of stories about the history of Exxon Mobil, the biggest, richest fossil fuel company there ever was. And it turns out that beginning in the 1970s, Exxon knew everything that there was to know about climate change. They employed some of the best scientists. They outfitted their oil tankers with CO2 sensors so that they could get good readings out across the ocean. They were building powerful computer models. They made their money off carbon. They wanted to understand it, and they did understand it. They knew very early on exactly what was going to happen, and they put that knowledge to good use within their company. Exxon carefully built all its new drilling rigs and platforms and installations to account for the rise in sea level that they knew was coming. And they went out and bid on parcels up in the Arctic, for instance, that they knew were soon going to be melted. But they didn't tell the rest of us. In fact, just the opposite. They spent tens of millions of dollars building the architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation that kept us from doing anything for 25 years, okay? And it's astonishing to see the number of think tanks, quote, think tanks, unquote, and things that they propped up and set up to spread the idea that there was somehow doubt about this science. These guys were hiring veterans of the tobacco industry who'd done exactly the same thing. The CEO of Exxon went to China and told its leaders, don't pay any attention to this climate stuff. The world is cooler now than it was 20 years ago. Go full speed ahead with fossil fuel, which for a while China did. Just think about it for a minute. If Exxon had merely told the truth, if they'd said in 1989, when Jim Hansen of NASA testified before Congress and told the world for the first time that the planet was heating, if Exxon had merely said, you know what, our scientists have found the same thing, no one would have said, oh, Exxon, you're climate alarmists, you know. This is silly. Everyone would have said, okay, we've got a problem, we need to get to work. But they did precisely the opposite and continue to do. They and their colleagues continue to pour money into the political campaigns of people who make climate denial their bread and butter, who block any effort in Washington to have anything happen. That's why there's not going to be next year or anytime soon, barring the kind of political revolution that some of our local heroes are calling for, a call that I heartily endorse. That's why there's not going to be, for instance, a price on carbon, even though it's the most obvious thing that every economist left, right, and center around the planet has called for a quarter century. You can see it too, this resistance from the fossil fuel industry at more local levels. I was doing that piece for the New Yorker. The part of it was about Rutland, and part of it was about Phoenix, Arizona, which is, you know, the Valley of the Sun. It's the sunniest single city on our continent. It's the place where they root for the Phoenix Suns, you know, and the Arizona Sun Devils. It's also the place where, after a lobbying and political campaign with a lot of dark money that apparently came from people like the Koch brothers, the Arizona Utility Board let one of their utilities impose a $50 a month charge on anyone who had the temerity to want to put a grid-connected solar panel on the roof. Okay, in essence, stopping the solar business cold in the sunniest place on the continent. Same thing happened last week or the week before in Nevada. This time, not the Koch brothers. This time, Warren Buffett, owner of the local utility, managing to not only stop, you know, make it economically impossible for new solar. They even took out the, they didn't even grandfather in existing plans under existing solar systems under their new thing. Those guys are now supposed to pay a fee every month as well. It's crazy at precisely the moment when we should be sprinting as fast as we possibly can towards a renewable energy future. People do everything they can to prevent it from happening. We see the inertia even here in Vermont. I think it's in this case probably more inertia than ill will, but the fact that we're really seriously wanting to build a new gas pipeline down the western side of Vermont that'll be there for 40 or 50 years, when instead we should be building very quickly on the innovations that people are figuring out in conferences like this one, is a great shame. So the question becomes what to do about any of this, okay? And in some ways, you guys are off the hook, right? In your day jobs, you're doing the Lord's work. You're getting it done. You're helping in enormous ways that are extremely important. Would that all we needed to do was our day jobs, you know? My day job, the thing I like to do, the thing I know how to do is as a writer, okay? That's where I came up. It's what my skills are. You can tell my skills are not as a public speaker, okay? I'm like most writers, I'm an introvert. You know, it's very nice to be here with you all, but frankly, I'd rather be home in my room typing, you know? And for a long time, that's, I thought, was my role only in all of this. I would keep writing books and articles about it, and eventually there'd be enough information in the system and we would win the argument, and, you know, other people would make the political changes necessary, and on we'd go, and so on and so forth. And that proved to be sadly mistaken, because it turned out that we weren't really in an argument at all. We'd won the argument 25 years ago. It's entirely clear, and has been for a very long time, what's happening. We're not in an argument, we're in a fight. And fights are about power and money, okay? And so we have to figure out, not in our day jobs, but in our other job as citizens, how it is that we're going to build enough power to take on the people who are preventing action and to make it happen fast enough to matter. So let me tell you just briefly the story of this thing, 350.org, okay? Because that didn't exist the last time that I came to talk with you either. There are people in this room who will remember in 2006, a decade ago, walking up the west side of Vermont from, we did this little climate march. We started in Ripton at Robert Frost's old summer writing cabin, because he's, you know, our patron saint, and up we walked the west side of Vermont, mostly up Route 7. It took us 5 days. When we got to Burlington, there were 1,000 of us walking, which those of you who are Vermonters know is a lot of people to get in any one place in Vermont, you know, short of Thunder Road and this conference, you know, that's about as, you know, many Vermonters as you get in any one spot. So it was good. We were happy with it until we read the story in the Free Press the next morning, and it said that those 1,000 Vermonters who had walked for 5 days were probably the biggest demonstration that had yet taken place about climate change in the U.S. And when I read that, I knew why we were losing, you know. We had all the kind of superstructure of a movement. We had Al Gore, and we had engineers, we had scientists, we had policy people. And the only part of the movement that we didn't have was the movement part, you know. Liz, is it possible that you took away that clicker when you were up here talking? Well, if someone has it, bring it to me so I can show you some pictures. It's probably up here someplace, and I'm just not seeing it.
For a snake, right?
Yeah. Indeed it is. Good, good, good. Thank you very much. Very much. We started this thing shortly thereafter that we kind of thought about as we were walking for those 5 days. And by the way, going out and walking for a while is a good way to just have time to think about things, you know, especially in Vermont, because there's no danger you'll have a cell signal and be able to look at your smartphone or anything, you know. And what we thought was, well, we should build some kind of movement. We should try and organize people, and we should probably do it all over the world, because they don't call it global warming for nothing, you know. And so that's what we set out to do. When I say we, I mean me and 7 undergraduates at Middlebury, where I teach a little bit. Okay, there was something ludicrous about this plan, which happily we were not smart enough to kind of understand. We picked the odd name that we picked, 350.org, because we wanted to work globally. I mean, it's the most important number in the world. It's what the scientists were then beginning to say, was the most carbon you could safely have in the atmosphere measured in parts per million. So probably the most important number. But also, if you're going to organize around the world, it's better not to be using kind of English words. Arabic numerals are a good thing, okay? But we didn't have any money. We didn't have any lists. We didn't have... There were 7 undergraduates. There were 7 continents. Each one took one. The guy who got the Antarctic also got the internet, okay? And so off we went to do our work, and our work was to find other people like ourselves. There's not everywhere someone who's interested in, like, who thinks of themselves as an environmentalist, but everywhere there's someone working on human rights, on food and hunger, on public health, on women's rights, on all the things you're not going to have in a degrading world, you know. And so they were the kind of natural allies, and they got it right away. And we said, let's take a day, just a day, and it was in the fall of 2009. And let's use it as a day to kind of take this number and drive it into the information bloodstream of the planet. And we had no idea how well this was going to work, or if it was going to work at all. We got the first sense it might a couple of days early. Everybody was supposed to do this on a Saturday around the world, and on Thursday we were sitting in our little one-room office in the north end and around our table, and we all had our laptops open doing our work, and the satellite phone rang, and it was our leader in Ethiopia, who, like many of our leaders, was she, and like all of them, like me all these many years, they volunteer, and like a surprising number of them, 17 years old, okay? And she was in tears. She said, the government took away our permit for Saturday, so we can't, but we're going to do it today, and before they can stop us, you know. And that's not why she was crying. Now, that was a brave thing to do in a not very friendly government. The reason she just gets, we don't want to jump the gun. We want to do this the same day as everybody else. We want to be part of the whole big thing. We're really sorry. We hope we're not spoiling it for anybody. And we've got 15,000 young people out in the street in Addis Ababa chanting 350. So I was like, Luau, don't worry about the date. It's okay, you know. And it was okay. It was the great, beautiful beginning to what turned into kind of 72 hours of astonishing. I mean, the second picture that came in actually was from U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Made a 350 with sandbags, said we're parking our Humvee for the weekend and walking. Okay, but for the next 72 hours, the pictures were pouring in. Sometimes 30 and 40 a minute, because it turned out that there were 5,200 of these demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN called it the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. And I show them to you just to give you a sense of who your brothers and sisters in this work are around the world, because there are a lot of them, okay? They don't look the way that we all have been told, and I've been told thousands, environmentalists are rich white people who don't have anything else to worry about, and if you had to worry where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist, and so on and so forth. It took about half an hour of watching these pictures pour in to realize what a load of nonsense that was, that most of the people we were working with around the world were poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what most of the world consists of. And what do you know? They're exactly as worried about the world and the future as any of us, maybe more so, because the future bears down hard on you in these places. And people with great wit, and, you know, all over the place, great involvement of religious leaders. This was 10 years or 5 years or something before the Pope's wonderful encyclical. So this was just at the beginning, when people hadn't yet were surprised to see the head of Muslim South Africa next to him, the head of indigenous traditions behind them, the Anglican Archbishop at the head of this huge march, or our biggest evangelical college. Or, you know, I've been in the Mideast to do some organizing. The Dead Sea shrinking rapidly. People wanted to do something, but there's too many military checkpoints in the way. So the Jordanians said, we'll make the big 3 on our beach, and the Palestinians said, we'll do the 5 in Palestine, and the Israelis said, well, we'll do the 0 on our beach. And it was a beautiful day. And, you know, 300 of these things across China, not easy to place to do this work. Some of them got broken up by the police, but, you know, the Chinese have started doing remarkable things now. There's more renewable energy going up in China than any place in the world, and by a large margin. Those are our brothers and sisters in the Maldives, in the Indian Ocean, and they're demonstrating. That's the Student Government Association. They're holding their meeting in the lagoon to sort of show the existential problem that they and many others face. The Maldives are paradise, you know, white sand beaches, coconut palms, and a culture that's been there for continuously for 5,000 years, but probably not going to make it for another 100, because the highest point in the islands are about 1.5 meters above sea level, something like that. Not a good place to be on a rapidly warming planet, but they're fighting, and fighting hard. Everywhere, people fighting hard. I mean, that's Yemen. That's the toughest place in the world, probably. That 0 is all women in full black burqa. So to us, they do not look like the local chapter of the Sierra Club, but their hearts are in the same place. They're thinking not about themselves, but about the future, about other people. There were, it must be said, 400 or 500 pictures that ended up in a file marked 350 adorable, you know. And they were adorable, and they were also hard to look at. I mean, those girls are going to be refugees in the course of their life. And not from anything they did, from stuff we did, you know, and continue to do. And so we've kept up this kind of work all over the world for the last few years. We think now we've organized about 20,000 demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea. And it's been really fun work, and it feels like it's been useful even in the hardest places in the world. And we've gotten to meet and know people in every corner of the planet, and in cities we'd never heard of, and in places we'd heard of but for other reasons. And it's been completely wonderful, and we've gotten to do these huge art projects, things so big we needed satellites to kind of see them from space. That was my favorite. That's in those dry arroyo riverbeds now of the Southwest that no longer have water moving through them. But when the satellite came over, 3,000 or 4,000 people in Santa Fe whipped blue blankets up overhead for a second just to kind of bring the river a little back to life there, Had we 50 years, this is just the kind of work that we would just keep doing all the time, because that's, education like that on that level is truly important. It's how things change, and things do change, and we'd see the kind of gradual evolution that we needed, and it's just as in your business, you build somebody beautiful renovation and put in a air source heat pump, and their brother-in-law comes at Thanksgiving and he sees it, and you get a call the next day, and then before long they've got a plug-in hybrid running off the solar panel. Just over time things happen. That's how change should happen. Our problem is we don't have any 50 years. We had to start 25 years ago if we were going to get done what needs doing. We are miles behind the physics. We have to move now, not slowly but fast. One of the problems of my life is the needing to avoid saying to people sometimes, if only you'd listened to me then, 25 years ago, now 27 years ago, I guess, when I wrote The End of Nature, which was the first book about this, we still had a lot of easy trajectories out of this thing. There were lots of ways, things we could have started doing then that would have gotten us on the right path then. But thanks to folks like Exxon, we didn't, and so now we're in a tough place where we have to move faster than is comfortable, and that means we have to do things that are not comfortable at all right? And that's when I talk about needing you as citizens as well as builders and engineers. That's what I mean. A few of you may have come down when we started this to Washington, when we started this agitation against the Keystone Pipeline in August of 2011. And we thought nobody thought there was any chance that we'd actually block this thing. National Journal, the insider newspaper in Washington, polled their 300 energy experts, people on the Hill, lobbyists and things, in that summer of 2011, and 93% of them said that TransCanada Company would have its permit for the Keystone Pipeline by the end of 2011. But we knew we had to try because there was so much carbon up in those tar sands in Canada. If you took all the economically recoverable oil out of there and burnt it, you'd raise the CO2 level on the planet from its current 400 parts per million to 540 parts per million just from that one deposit alone. So we had to do what we could, and what people did was remarkable. 1,253 people came and got arrested. That was the most people that had been arrested about anything in this country in 30 years, and it was enough to get things started, Pretty soon, it was spreading around the world, and then we were following the president everywhere he went, and there soon, people ringing the White House shoulder to shoulder, 5 deep all around that 1.5-mile perimeter, and that was in the fall of 2011, and the president said at that point, well, perhaps we should study this some more and wait until after the next election to make a decision. And that was good by us. And so we did study it some more, and we kept working hard, and the U.S. Senate got more emails in a single day than they'd ever gotten on an issue, and there were more public comments filed than on any infrastructure project in history. And what do you know, they decided to delay a decision through the next election in 2014, too. And people kept pressing, and finally, last November, right before the Paris conference, the president finally said, okay, we won't build this thing, It was the first time that the oil industry had lost a big fight like that ever. And what was especially nice about it was not that it keeps 800,000 barrels of oil, of the dirtiest oil on earth, in the ground every day. And it's not that it completely screwed up the financing for the tar sands, so that long before the price of oil began to drop, all the big majors were starting to pull money out of those things. They're not going to be expanding like they thought. And the thing that was really good about it was people all over the world looked up and saw, well, you know, we could do this too. The president of the American Natural Gas Association at an industry conference last year, kind of the reverse industry conference of this one, I think, he got up and said to his peers, he lamented the fact, he said, we somehow have to figure out a way to stop the keystoneization of every other project that we've got going on. Every coal mine, every frack well, every new oil port, they're all being opposed. People are going to jail now someplace every day around this world, and we're beginning to win some of these fights, okay? The world's biggest coal mine, slated to be built in the west of Australia, we think now, we've sort of learned within the last 2 months, isn't going to be built. They've still got the permits, but there's pretty much every bank in the world has refused now to finance it. They've pulled the plug on it because there's been such remarkable activism going on, and place after place after place after place. Think about that when you see people out in the western side of Vermont or in Massachusetts trying to block the pipeline. Else, understand that they're part of this resistance that's trying to hold the fossil fuel industry in check long enough that we can build the kind of renewable energy them, derail them from the project which they understand to be just as urgent of getting their infrastructure now, so it'll be there for at least another generation or two. It is a pitched battle, and the places where it's going on are, and the levels at which it's going on are amazing. That's a billboard from what's called the Heart, okay, set up among others by Exxon to fight against any action on global warming. And a couple of years ago, they put up billboards in the country that were like that. That's Ted Kaczynski. Some of you may be old enough like me to remember who he was, the Unabomber, this kind of weird serial killer. And so they put up these billboards. There was one with Charles Manson. They say, I still believe in global warming, do you? So, I'll just show you a couple more pictures from our colleagues and your colleagues in the Pacific, on these 10 low-lying island nations in the Pacific that are going to disappear like the Maldives in the Indian Ocean before the century is out unless we act very quickly. And again, these are cultures that have been there for thousands of years with deep traditions. So they all built canoes on each of these islands, and then they took them to Australia, where they used them to blockade the biggest coal port in the world, Newcastle in Australia. And it was a gorgeous day, you know. A few people, I guess you would call them kayaktivists, taking on the biggest ships on the whole face of the planet, you know. And it was symbolic, but it was also very effective. This was a few months before people decided not to build that coal mine in Australia. And in fact, that town, Newcastle in Australia, despite the fact that it's almost entirely dependent on coal at the moment, looked at those people and they decided that they were going to divest their municipal holdings from fossil fuel, all right? Something, as I add, that Vermont has not yet managed to do. That's the kind of that's the kind of work we need all to be doing for the moment, not just in our day jobs, but as citizens. It's not the work we should have to be doing, you know, given the fact that scientists gave us all this warning. Our leaders should long ago have gotten to work and done what needed to be done. But since they didn't, we have no choice but to go do it. It's not comfortable all the time or easy work. There's, if you have to, but it's completely doable. It's our parents and grandparents had to go off and, fight the fascists in Europe, and a lot of them got killed. You're not going to get killed doing this. You're just going to have to spend some time making it happen. I'll end just by, since I was looking at those pictures, it just reminded me of those demonstrations at the beginning of this Keystone stuff in Washington and all the people getting arrested. And, my job after I got out of jail was to go and just sort of tell everybody every day, like, good for you. And because it's hard. A little hard. You feel a little weird sitting down someplace where the police tell you not to be, All of us are good law-abiding citizens, so it just feels strange and whatever. There were two things we said to people when we asked them to come to get arrested in Washington. And the first thing was, I wrote the letter that asked people to come, and it's not an easy kind of letter to write. So one of the things I said was, young people should not have to be the cannon fodder here, okay? You've seen most of these pictures that young people are leading this fight all over the world. But in this case, if you're, 22 in our economy, an arrest record might not be the absolute best thing for your resume, One of the unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you, And so it was with pleasure that there were a lot of people with hairlines like mine we saw arriving in D.C. We did not ask people before they got arrested, how old are you? Because that would be rude. But we did cleverly say, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest cohorts were from the FDR and the Truman administrations. And on the last day, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He was old enough that he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which was long enough ago that I'd forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration, okay? What was best about that, I think, was that there were a lot of young people on hand helping organize all this, and they, for a couple of weeks, got to see their elders acting the way that elders are supposed to act in a working society, okay? And that was beautiful to see. The other thing we told people was, if you want to come get arrested, would you put on a necktie or wear a dress, okay? Not, as you can tell, because, I'm a good Vermonter, neckties are for funerals, but because we wanted to visually demonstrate the thing I've been trying to say all day here, and I try to say pretty much every day, which is there's not the slightest thing radical about what we're talking about, not at all, okay? In fact, if you think about it, asking that the world remain in slightly the same shape that it's been for the last 10,000 years is a profoundly conservative demand, all right? Radicals work at oil companies. If you're willing to get up in the morning and make your fortune by altering the chemistry of the atmosphere, after you've been told what it will do, after you've watched the Arctic melt, then you're a radical on a scale that no human being has ever been before. And our job is to figure out how to check that radicalism. And you guys do it every day in your day jobs. And I know that that work is hard and demanding and incredibly important, and I thank you for it, and everyone does, in the deepest way. You're pioneers on the edge of one of the most important changes that we've ever gone through. And it's why it makes me hesitate to ask for anything more from you at all. But we need to. We need you also beyond your day jobs as part of this big movement that's building. You bring special credibility to it. I don't know if you all need to get arrested, but you all need to do as much as you can, and I know you will, and I thank you in advance for it. Thank you all.